Now then, Vinyl Monkey again, continuing my ridiculous, nonsensical series of highlighting top 10 in various instruments, which I'll include the voice in that as well. Last week I did top 10 lead guitarists, upsetting a few people, including some who thought it was a sin that George Harrison wasn't in there. I couldn't necessarily disagree. I also upset myself by somehow cocking it up and missing out the person who I had at number 4 or 5, I think, Stephen Malkmus of Pavement, one of my real favourite guitarists, real lovely, spiky, angular guitarist, perfectly matches his oblique lyrics. But anyway, yeah, cock-ups and things are I suppose they go with the channel, really. So I'll do my best anyway this week. This is my top 10 or top 10 favourite bass players. Now last week you may have noticed that I didn't include any of the great jazz lead guitarists in me top 10, Kenny Burrell, Wes Montgomery, people like that, who I do enjoy listening to, but I just think that particular instrument lends itself to sort of rock blues much more than jazz, pleasant though it is in jazz. But for other instruments that's different, so we will be encroaching probably into the jazz collection as well from here on in. But I'm going to continue with me holding up my bits of paper, but I had a couple of comments last week. Somebody thought it was brilliant and reminiscent of Bob Dylan's performance in Subterranean Homesick Blues. Others thought it was faintly ridiculous. Some commented that it was a waste of paper, so I've actually used much thinner. I've got all the top 10 on little slim bits of paper, all 10 on one page this time, so hopefully appease the tree huggers out there, of which I'm one, by the way. I do love trees, and I would hug them if I was a hugger. But anyway, where am I? Yeah, bass players. Well, this is even more ludicrous than lead guitarists. At least with lead guitarists, you know, they tend to have a sort of distinctive sort of role in the song. Bass players have a much more subtle role often in the song, driving the sort of rhythm of the song, and often in the background. But you know if they're not doing an effective job. It's what bass and drums what really makes the sort of sound and feel, and as I say, rhythm of many of the songs. And sometimes an upfront bass player can be a bit, I don't know, unwelcome, if you like. But anyway, so impossible to evaluate. And as I said with lead guitarists, you know, there are just so many. There are thousands and thousands. And I'll not include a couple of big names today probably, which will offend some people or annoy some people. But anyway, here we go. At number 10, I have got Tina Weymouth of the Talking Heads. Tina Weymouth, long-standing member of Talking Heads, punky bass player, but at the same time funky bass player. So it's a punky funk sound, and it's her sound, I think, which makes Talking Heads distinctive and potentially danceable, I think, as well. If you listen to the intro on the single Psycho Killer, or on this album, the other single Once in a Lifetime, you know, you can hear that distinctive punky funky bass that is characteristic of Tina Weymouth, and really drives and defines one of the great groups to come out of New York, Talking Heads. So that's my number 10, Tina Weymouth. Now my number 9 is a guy who's had a 70-year career. He's still alive, I think. I'm sure he is still going. This is Ron Carter. He's actually played on, he's played with everybody, you know, going way back. The one I'm going to highlight actually is this great album, Speak No Evil by Wayne Shorter, which he appears on. But he's appeared on over 2,200 albums as a bass player, which apparently is some sort of record. And yeah, he is just the epitome of a classic stand-up bass jazz player. He's played right through the sort of eras, pre-bop, bebop, hard bop, post bop, all of those styles. As I say, he's played with just about everybody. I was looking on YouTube actually, and I found a recent, I think it's only a year or two old, Tiny Desk concert where he's playing with a couple of piano and drums, just in a very simple sort of pared back way, and you can appreciate the guy's talent on that. So look that one up if you want. Ron Carter Tiny Desk concert. But he's my number 9. My number 8, getting into the rock music territory, is Andy Fraser. Andy Fraser actually founded Free at the age of, I was involved in the foundation of the band Free at the ripe old age of 15. He'd already been playing with Alexis Corner. Had he played with John Mayall as well? I think he might have done. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, prodigious talent, really. He wrote All Right Now, apparently in 10 minutes in the dressing room after a gig in Durham. And he also wrote, much later, Obama, Yes We Can, which helped the Democrat election campaign back in whatever year it was. But it's perhaps on, well, he features right up front. This is up front bass. There's a lot of space in the band Free. Kossoff's guitar is very sparse. There's a sort of real loose sort of feel to the band, and Fraser really drives and often drives the melody. He plays some lovely sort of bass solos in All Right Now. This is the Free live album. There's Andy Fraser. He plays lovely sort of solos in All Right Now and in Mr. Big and one or two of the other tracks, but and he's just his sound is a brilliant complement to Paul Rodgers' sort of soul blues rock voice. Yeah, fantastic stuff. Andy Fraser, formerly of Free. My number 7 is Robbie Shakespeare. Robbie Shakespeare, who, along with the drummer Sly Dunbar, formed perhaps the most impressive and well-known and well-spread rhythm section in reggae music. He appears with all sorts of people: Dennis Brown, Gregory Isaacs, Wailers, Peter Tosh, loads and loads of people. They've provided the rhythm section for. The one I'm highlighting here is Black Uhuru's Brutal from 1986, and he just plays these beautiful deep reggae grooves, absolutely fantastic, very distinctive sound. Apparently uses all sorts of tricks and electronics and in there as well. And as I say, I'm not a musician. I can't really comment with any qualification on anybody's musical style. But yeah, he was known as bass player by some people. But yeah, Robbie Shakespeare, my number 7. My number 6. Now, I never thought I'd be showing up or even owning up to having a Yes album, because these are one of the bands that I was into them as a school kid, but I smashed all their LPs up when punk hit in '76. I went to see them when Tales from Topographic Oceans came out. I forget what year it was, but we were thrown out of Newcastle City Hall for booing and booing. But having said all of that, hang on a second, I'll get me, Chris Squire, the bass player, is surely one of the great players of the rock, certainly prog rock genre. I mean, just listen to the opening track, Yours Is No Disgrace, off the Yes album. And he's just got this really, I don't know, elaborate, it's sort of intricate, but it's melodic, a really unique style that, again, it really, I don't know, very, very impressive. And often I don't sit down and try and orally, that is, isolate the bass sounds, but I have been for the purpose of this exercise, and yeah, fantastic playing, absolutely fantastic. So that's my number 6, Chris Squire from Yes. My number 5, now I could ask you a little quiz question here, which is which band has had more number 1 hits than the Beatles, the Stones, the Beach Boys and Elvis all put together? And all of these hits were pretty much through the 60s, late 50s into the very early 70s. Yeah, well, it's a band that did eventually become known as the Funk Brothers, but basically it's the Motown Records house band, and their bass player was a guy called James Jamison, who most people, I suppose, would never particularly have heard of. And in fact, often the musicians on Motown Records were never ever credited, and I think the first one he ever became credited on was Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Obviously fantastic record, but James Jamison, if you listen to the Temptations' My Girl, that intro, which you only need usually the first note or second note, and you know the song and you're already up and singing it, it's irresistible. Or the Four Tops, Bernadette, or Jackson 5, there's loads and loads and loads of just innumerable classic hits where the bass line is really prominent, often the first thing you hear in the song, which gets the song going. And as I say, the opening bars of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, the title track of that album, absolutely fantastic. So yeah, very, very influential, but not particularly well known. That's James Jamison, my number 5. My number 4, one of the great heavy rock guitarists, one of the most influential, Jack Bruce from, I suppose best known in the band Cream, although he'd been involved with hits and top bands before then. He'd been involved with Manfred Mann, he'd been involved with John Mayall, and post Cream he was involved with a variety of bands. He was involved with a couple of the members of Mountain. He was involved in quite a lot of solo projects, and he worked as a bassist across loads of different areas and types, genres of music. So he made a huge mark on it. But his work with Cream, where he actually composed and sang on most of the songs, as well as playing this sort of really strong melodic bass lines, is where he's best known. And as I say, just a superb player, and extremely influential on those that followed. So that's Jack Bruce, my number 4. And in a similar vein, in some ways, is my number 3. This is John Entwistle, otherwise known as the Ox, from the band The Who. This is The Who's next album. Listen to the bass on any of these tracks won't get fooled again. My Wife, which Entwistle wrote. The Ox, John Entwistle, he had a sort of really quite a unique style. I think he was sort of heavy on the treble. He was quite a yeah, why was he unique? I think it was unique because his was the one that really provided the rhythm in the Who. I think Keith Moon drumming was more like a lead instrument, and behind that, Entwistle had to be sort of rock solid and hold the whole thing together. And again, he's someone who just was very, very influential. He was known as the quiet man in the Who, but I'm not sure that was the case really. Certainly, if you look at his death, where he went out allegedly, heart attack, snorting cocaine off a prostitute's belly in a hotel room. Way to go, John. Absolute way to go. But anyway, that's my number 3, John Entwistle from the Who. My number 2 is Jaco Pastorius, who, jazz guitarist, although he worked with people in rock as well. He worked a lot with Joni Mitchell, but although that was in a jazz sort of jazzy style period. But Jaco Pastorius, he worked also. I've got 2 albums to show really. This is Joni Mitchell's Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, where he features often just with Joni on guitar and him on bass, and he's really upfront on this album. This is Weather Report, Heavy Weather, where he features all the way through, including on their hit Birdland at the beginning. And Pastorius' start, they reckon that that the level of skill and speed, particularly in innovation on the bass guitar, had never been seen before. And in some ways I just wonder whether Jaco Pastorius was almost too good. He was given too much space to show his talent. And it's one of those players. I've got him as my number 2, but I've got to be in the mood for a bit of Jaco really. He's if I'm not, I find it a bit too much, a bit like having too much sugar or something. It can be great, but I don't know, can it be a bit much? Can he be too clever, too good? But an absolutely brilliant player, a tragic life, had all sorts of drugs and health problems, and ended up homeless I think in the 80s, and died a sort of tragically early death, got beat up outside a nightclub and never ever recovered. But anyway, there he is, a picture of Jaco there. But that's my number 2, Jaco Pastorius. My number 1, I've got joint number 1s. I know it's a bit of a cheat, but the first one I've got is a guy who played bass on, 2 of my very favourite albums from this whole collection behind me. That is Eric Dolphy's Out to Lunch, sort of avant-free jazz stuff, and Van Morrison's classic 1968 Astral Weeks. And that guy is, I've lost my little bits of paper, oh dear, where have they gone? Never mind, it's a guy called Richard Davis, who take Astral Weeks for example. Van Morrison had gone over to New York with these songs. They got together a couple of session jazz musicians, one of which was Richard Davis, and they only spent 2 days in the studio. They'd never heard this stuff. Van doing streams of consciousness, stuff which meant absolutely nothing to them. They didn't know what the heck, he's sort of singing memories of his Belfast childhood in as I say, streams of consciousness style, and they just had to fill in and provide some sort of back into this, but they do it absolutely beautifully. And I would argue that Richard Davis's bass on this album is some of the best playing. I don't know whether you categorise this as a rock album, but it's the very best bass playing on a rock album. And similarly in his jazz stuff, like on this one with Eric Dolphy. Eric Dolphy, it's way out there, and a lot of the lead instrumentals, the trumpet and the vibes are sort of going way off piste, and it is Richard Davis that holds this album together and sort of makes it coherent. So yeah, an absolute genius really. Richard Davis, but joint at number one, I couldn't separate them, is another true genius and giant of the bass. This time it's an upright bass. This is Charles Mingus, there he is there. That's with the Charles Mingus Sextet, East Coasting, and that is one of his classic albums, Mingus Our Home. Mingus, an absolute prodigy, child prodigy. He started off with the cello, but I think I mentioned about other musicians on here, you know, the American sort of classical music establishment wasn't ready to accept black people, so he had to sort of move from the cello and into jazz, and he picked up a bass and apparently used some of his sort of cello classical training to contribute to his bass playing, but they reckon he's one of the greatest upright bass players ever. But he's also a brilliant composer. He's worked with everybody from Louis Armstrong to Duke Ellington and beyond. He's led his own bands, big bands, smaller, more intimate quartets, quintets. He's known as the angry man of jazz. He's a complicated man, a man with a bad temper, a big man, often obese, maybe, not so bad there, but renowned for sort of fallouts, thumping his bandmates, sacking them, berating the audiences, etc. But an absolute genius, one of my favourite artists of all time, with any instrument. Charles Mingus, my joint number one. So that's my 10. You'll realise by now I've missed the most famous bass player, Paul McCartney. I don't know. I mean, they're all great, but you know, you've got to draw lines somewhere. If you're only going to have 10, 10's a small number, and then other great ones. You know, some of the bass frontmen. You know, like Phil Lynott and Sting. You know, people like that. Somehow haven't appeared in there. But anyway, any comments welcome. Thanks for watching. Cheers.